Welcome to this webcast. It's great to imagine you. My name is Jonathan Foust, and I am delighted to have this time to share a talk with you, which is a oldie but a goodie on the flow state, how to access the flow state. That's what this is all about. Um, Little technical difficulty here. Okay, there we go. Before we begin, a big thank you to the Insight Meditation Community of Washington for hosting this, to our producer, Glenn Harrison. Also, a big thank you to Rita Moran, our mindful movement leader. And you can get all of Rita's information about her mindful movement flow before this class on my Facebook page and also on my website. So all that is there. Speaking of websites, I have a newsletter. There's a weekly, another that I send out every now and then. My best photography, compendium of talks, and all that good stuff. And finally, if you listen to these talks at all, you know I always mention that they're offered in the spirit of dana or generosity. That is to say, they're offered so that no one's denied access. So um, if you feel like supporting this, making sure that no one's ever denied access, thank you. I appreciate that. And the practice itself is really the greatest gift. So before we begin, let's do a little short yet brief yet succinct yet hopefully helpful meditation. You might like to let your body move, stretch in any way that feels good for you. And when you're ready, if you like, you can close your eyes. It's not absolutely required, but many people find having eyes closed to be a helpful form of practice. And our basic doorway portal in this form of meditation practice is through the senses, through the body. So if you like, with your eyes closed, you might begin to slow down your breath. Let's take a little bit of time here to just to explore how the breath can be such a powerful tool. We'll do a little coherent breathing. Breathing in slowly to the count of 4, exhaling to the count of 4, inhale to the count of 4, exhale to the count of 4, and continue on your own. We'll do this for about 1 minute. You're not pausing very long between the in-breath and the out-breath. Feel the effect on the mind. You may notice a deepening quality of absorption, present moment awareness. If you like, you can play with the breath a little bit, and you might like to breathe in slowly to the count of 4, and then just let the breath relax and fall out of the body on the exhalation. Breathing in slowly to the count of 4, completely letting go on the out breath. Maybe 3 more rounds here. Slow breath in. On the out breath, completely relaxing, softening. And now, if you like, drop all control of the breath. Let the breath be free flowing and effortless, and just sense if it's possible to keep that same awareness of the feeling of the breath on the inside. This practice of present moment awareness is dramatically enhanced by conscious softening, relaxation, and opening into the feeling tone that comes when you relax. I'll mention just a few key points. You might sense from the inside out the forehead. Feel the forehead smooth, letting all expression melt away from your face. Feel your face expressionless. The inside of the mouth, in particular the tongue. The throat, open. Feel the weight of the shoulders and sense the weight and the heaviness of the arms. The backs of the hands, the palms. The movement of the belly as your body breathes. The weight and the volume of your legs. The soles of the feet and the heels. And sensing now the whole body from the crown of the head and down through the soles of the feet. Is there anything here that could soften or relax or let go? Is there anything inside that could soften, relax, or let go even more than that? And from this place of relaxation, I'd like to suggest one of three points where you might focus your attention. One is on the sounds, 360-degree awareness of the sound vibrations. Another anchor might be the movement of the breath, the experience of the breath as you breathe. A third anchor might be the feeling in the palms, the sense of vibration or tingling or pulse. Whichever of these anchors appeals to you for this next period of time, let your primary focus be here on the direct, immediate experience of sound vibration or breath or the feeling tone in the palms. When you notice your mind lost in thought, is it possible to meet that moment with a sense of mild celebration? You are again awake and present. Can you again relax and soften? And can you feel from the inside the breath or sound or felt sense of the hands? Re-arriving and receiving the moment. You might explore now in this remaining minute or so. We're letting go and releasing any sense of concentration or focus or effort, and just relax and soften and let your moment happen by itself. How much more could you simply relax and let be? Letting your body now move, stretch in any way that feels good for you as we begin our transition. There's no hurry, no rush. You'll take a few moments to stretch. Welcome back. You may be familiar with what's called the flow state. It's often described as this mysterious experience. Well, the more we kind of drill down into these moments where life is just in this beautiful sense of unfolding moment by moment, a sense of relaxation, absorption, there's actually quite a few things you can do to not make it happen, but cultivate a sense of the flow state arising. That's what this talk is all about. This is part one of part two, part one of two parts on how to open to the flow state. Hope you find this helpful. This is good stuff. So enjoy the following talk and so many blessings in your practice and in everything you feel called to. I've spent an inordinate amount of time driving heavy equipment around in my life. I grew up on a farm in southeastern Pennsylvania, and I've worked on a couple farms in my life. When I was in college, I was feeling pretty lost, and I had two fantasies. One was to find a way to refresh my meditation practice, and the other was, how could I possibly live and work on a farm and still go to college? And magically, it happened. I met someone by the name of John Peterson, who was a recent graduate of the college where I was going. His father had passed away, and he took over the farm. He was also very into meditation, so it was a real sync up. And I had many, many happy years of working with John on the farm. And just a quick little mention. There's a very, very cool film called The Real Dirt on Farmer John, if you Google for it. The Real Dirt on Farmer John, that kind of tells the story of his life about growing up on a farm in the Midwest, and then losing the farm in the financial crisis. This was after I had left. And then the reinvention of the farm into one of the largest biodynamic organic farms in the country. You can also Google for angelic organics. So we were running about 1,000 acres when we were working together. And it's now this much, much smaller, but a really beautiful education center around organic biodynamic farming. Some people are drawn to farming, just, I think, for the romance, for the idea of growing things. And a lot of people are drawn to the idea of farming for the toys. There's so much automation in farming right now, and it's really quite stunning how little manpower it takes having access to these amazing machines that can do so much work. And so much of my years of living on farms was driving tractors and big trucks and hay cutters and making the big round bales. And one of the most intense things or exciting things to drive is a combine. You've probably seen combines harvesting oats or soybeans or corn. Combines are about the size of a small house. And driving one is like sitting in a seat at the second story window. And it's a real rush to learn how to operate one of these. And I wouldn't say I was masterful, but I put in my hours. And we had a combine, and basically you have the header, which is this big platform that's in front of you. It's kind of 6 rows wide, and it's hydraulically lifted, so you can lift and lower this whole big head in front of the machine depending on the conditions, rocks and so forth. And if you're harvesting wheat or oats, there's a pickup reel that's turning that pushes the crops down toward the cutter, and then you have a cutter or a sickle bar. It has these teeth, kind of like a big hedge cutter, and everything kind of falls inward. It's gathered up by the pickup reel. And then there are augers and screws that send it up a conveyor. And then it goes into a threshing drum where it kind of like beats the crops to shake the grain free from the stalks. And then the grain falls through these sieves into a collecting tank. And then that gets augered up into a collecting tank that's pretty high up on the machine. And then the chaff, or the unwanted material, the straw, gets passed along what are called straw walkers, and there are fans there that kind of blow it up in the air as you're kind of still sorting the grain out, and then the chaff falls out the back of the machine, and then you can spread it out evenly, or you can put it in a tight row for baling later. An incredibly complex machine. Just an incredibly complex machine, and getting them set up is amazing because you don't want to set it so much that you have really, really clean grain, but you're blowing a lot of it out the back. But also you don't want to have too much of the chaff in the grain, because then when you take it to the grain elevator where they dry it, they charge you for, they penalize you. So there's so much to figure out, so much detail. And when you're driving it, you're in a little air-conditioned box. It's kind of a windowed box, and then you have a steering wheel which kind of moves back and forth, and you've got the controls here, and then to your right you've got a panel of lights, because every one of these ball bearings has a sensor to let you know when it overheats. And if any of these sensors go off, there's a red light in front of you to kind of let you know. Why am I telling you this? Well, there's something about the attention to detail with so much going on, and then sort of this forced shift in consciousness that opens you up into our topic, the flow state, which is this state of being kind of like really aware of all the details and going with the flow, if you will. To make it even more complex, there are times when you're harvesting, you're driving along, and you have to have everything lined up and make sure that everything's functioning. You've got the platform just right. You've got everything set, and then a truck will come up next to you, and then you pull a little a little lever, and then you start augering the grain off into the truck. And then you need to slow down and speed up enough so you're filling up the corners of the truck, which is a very complex maneuver. So I love the challenge of it, and I love learning. And I remember there was one time in particular where I just felt I am the master of the universe. Everything is working perfectly. I'm monitoring everything. The truck came, I unloaded the truck, and as I'm moving along, so proud of myself, but at the same time, kind of in this almost mystical sense of this massive harvesting process. I remember thinking, like, how many people with individual size would it take to harvest what I'm harvesting here in 5 minutes? I noticed when I took a break that one of the sickle teeth had broken. So everywhere I went, there was this one line about 3 inches wide that wasn't cut. And of course, I got yelled at later, which was deservedly so. So I thought it was in flow, but I was actually missing a really important thing. Accessing the flow state is a really fascinating thing, because when you're in the flow state, it's very tied into what we've been exploring recently and in meditation about how it's related to concentration, and how concentration in your meditation practice can sort of set you up to sort of widen your attention and access the sense of flow. So much of meditation is about the willful gathering of attention, where you're arriving again and again and again. And in that sense of arriving, you can sometimes kind of really magically open up into the present moment. We talked before about access concentration, how you can move deeper and deeper into these amazing states of absorption, this kind of upwelling of intense pleasure that comes out of the moment itself, and then deeper levels of access. What I'd like to talk about here is what some people think of as a progression in meditation, where you move from tight and focused concentration and you become more aware of the background. You become more aware of change, and you become more aware of what some call flow. So in 4 parts, I'd like to talk about first the magic of being in the flow state. And I'd like to explore a little bit, is the flow state mindfulness? There's some really cool distinctions there. I'd also like to talk a little bit in the 3rd part about how to like sabotage the flow state, and also how to access and how to reinforce the flow state. I remember way back when, I had never played ping pong before in my life, but someone challenged me to a game, and I said, sure, I'll play. And we were sort of mildly bopping the ping pong ball back and forth, and for some reason, I kept hitting it back. And the person I was playing with got a little more intense, and I just kept hitting it back. And some of our rounds went like 15 or 20 rounds back and forth, and everything kind of slowed down, and I could begin to anticipate where the ball was going to go next. And it was an amazing experience. The first time in my life I'd ever picked up a ping pong racket, or whatever you call it. And then in the midst of this amazing back and forth, and I could see he was getting more and more frustrated and hitting it back harder. And I just sensed where it was going to go and managed to bop it back to him. And I had this thought that said, I am crushing this. I'm amazing at this. I immediately missed the next ball. And I never got that feeling back playing table tennis. I never back to that extent. I think part of that was beginner's mind. I had no idea what to expect. But part of it was about getting into that flow state. And you may be aware of that flow state in your life. Probably one of the most authoritative people on the flow state is Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. It's a very complicated name. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. He wrote about the flow state, accessing kind of optimal states of happiness. And he said that flow is a state of mind in which a person becomes fully immersed in an activity, completely involved and focused in what they're doing. Now, the flow state is usually most easily accessed in something that's active. It might be in nature, playing sports, dancing, playing music, listening to music, playing chess, rock climbing, working on a project. It might be a conversation. You can experience flow in groups as well. There's been a huge amount of attention paid to the flow state. I'll share some resources at the end, and it's fascinating reading about this because it can dramatically shift not only your meditation practice, but your creativity and your expression. You can access the flow internally as an individual by some key practices that kind of call on a number of factors to support you in getting more immersed and more absorbed into your experience. But we also experience flow as a group. When you're experiencing something together, when you're playing sports with others, or even observing sports, the sense of the crowd, kind of ebbing and flowing with the game. Listening to music as a group, when you're collaborating with someone. Improv is just a great example of being completely absorbed in kind of this arising moment. And flow is really, it's sort of a spectrum. Think of it as a spectrum. It's kind of like anger. You can be mildly peeved all the way to murderous rage. So you can experience sort of like light flow, kind of like little micro flows, all the way to very, very deep mystical qualities of experience. But I think it's safe to say that flow is a wholesome state. And then the question is, how does it relate to mindfulness, and how does it relate to meditation? We tend to think of meditation as subject-object. So let's say you're focusing on your breath. And the practice is about keeping your attention on the object of the breath. Mind wanders, you bring it back. But sometimes there can be a shift where subject and object drop away. Maybe it's most beautifully expressed by the poet Li Po in this very short little poem. He said, "We sit together, the mountain and me, until only the mountain remains." So that sense of I and mine kind of drops away. Of course, we can't make those moments happen, but we can cultivate the background. So for the past many weeks, I have the incredible blessing of living by the water on Cape Cod, and I'm really big into long distance swimming, as is Tara. That's one of the things we love. So we're swimming in the bay. No longer swimming in the ocean because swimming as shark bait is no longer very attractive. But swimming in the bay, and it's open water. There's strong currents. There could be very, very big waves. There's wind. It can be cold. It's challenging, but it's stimulating. It's skill building. And recently, I've been swimming about a mile a day in open water. And I take swimming as a mindfulness practice. And what's fascinating about it is sometimes I can kind of get a sense of that flow state. Usually when I start off, I'm kind of focused on the sensations. I'm kind of being aware of form. I can be kind of aware of my thoughts. Which way is the current going, and am I close enough to shore? So I'm beginning to sort of be aware more and more of my form, of my breathing, One of the things that I have to do is keep gauging where I am in relationship to the shore. I don't want to go too shallow, but I don't want to go too deep, because there are sharks on the bay side as well. So there are times when I'm swimming and everything is so smooth. I start to relax, I start to focus, and it feels sometimes like my body is doing it all by itself. It's all kind of like programmed, and I can feel that flow state. And then something occurs where I'll become aware that my form is a little bit off, where I'll realize that my right arm isn't extending quite as far as the left arm, and then I'll do a course correction. And I kind of concentrate on the form, and then I'll sort of open again back to the flow state, where I sort of relax and I kind of feel my body moving by itself. I think that's kind of how mindfulness works. You're aware of what's happening. And what also happens in when I'm swimming and in meditation is it kind of sets you up for insight. You realize, like, oh, my feet are dropping a little bit. Let me bring them up a little bit. Oh, I'm really aware that I'm getting competitive. Let me just notice that. And then, of course, there are times where I'm just swimming. And those are kind of those ecstatic moments where I'm not trying to make anything happen. I kind of drop into this incredible sense of no I, no mine. I'm just swimming. So in many ways, this is what we do in our meditation practice. So you might, as a little experiment, if you like, you can close your eyes, and if you would, just move your attention to your breath and feel your breath. You might slow down your breath. Notice where you feel it on the inside. And now, can you sense the observer? What is it that is aware of your breathing right now? And take a few moments, if you will, to kind of sense if you can firmly establish yourself in what some call the seat of the witness. Objective, non-preferential awareness. And then just allow yourself to explore the next two questions. What would happen if the witness was to simply fall away? Can you sense of just for a moment the light behind the witness? If you like, you can deepen your breath. And feel free to remain with your eyes closed, or if you like, you can open your eyes. So is mindfulness the same as the flow state? They're certainly intermingled, but some would say that they're not. Here's an interesting definition of mindfulness. Non-elaborative, non-judgmental, present-centered awareness in which each thought, feeling, or sensation that arises in the attentional field is acknowledged and accepted as is. Let me read that again. Here are the qualities. It's non-elaborative, so you're not adding a story to it. It's non-judgmental, no good, no bad. It's present-centered, and every thought, feeling, or sensation that arises in the attentional field is acknowledged and accepted. So this state, it's a mental state. It requires some self-discipline because you have to be aware of what's happening in order to accept it and acknowledge it. You have to learn how to maintain awareness of each passing moment. And you have to cultivate this attitude of allowing and acceptance. Flow involves intense task concentration. But here's the difference: a loss of self-awareness, an altered sense of time, and merging of activity and awareness. So this is maybe the best way to sum it up. Mindfulness is like you're standing on the bank of a river watching the stream. So you're the observer on the bank of the river watching the stream. Flow is where you lose the observer into an altered state. So you're in the stream. So the similarities are the two states they're rewarding. They're all about the present moment. They're all about optional functioning, and they're all about kind of like optimal mental health. But it's the difference between being the observer and then kind of losing the observer as you get absorbed into the experience. So it's variable, and we can't make it happen. I had a brief conversation with my Dharma brother, David Cabrera, who's an incredible musician and songwriter, and he was saying that in songwriting you have to be aware of the emptiness and this quality of listening. He said sometimes the flow state, it's like it comes to me. You have to wait and let it come to you. But he added this, which I think is a really important point. He said the truth is it's always there. Like the flow state, that sense of absorption, of change, it's always there. And it's delicate. You know, as the saying goes, you can't make this happen. All we can do is cultivate the optimal state for it to happen. So I'd like to talk a little bit about what is it that sabotages the flow state. Lamar Odom, who's a teammate of Kobe Bryant, the late Kobe Bryant, noticed in one particular game that Kobe got really quiet, which is kind of unusual. And he realized that something special was going to happen. And what was going to happen was the second highest single game scoring level in the NBA, where Kobe got into a flow state. And later, after the game, he was asked about what did he do that allowed him to score so many points. And he said that was just something that happened. It's tough to explain. He said it just turned into something special, and to sit here and say, I grasp what happened, that would be lying. I love that description. It just turned into something special. And to say that I grasp what happened would be lying. It is this mystical experience. I ran across this other description, which I found very, very helpful, where someone wrote, there's someone who's very into jiu-jitsu and competition. He said, competitions can be really nerve-wracking, let alone in jiu-jitsu. People are trying to break your limbs or choke you unconscious unless you tap out. Everyone is out there to win, and nobody wants to disappoint their team or their family or their friends. There are lots of spectators. It's easy to get caught up in all that. I felt it in previous competitions, and I still feel it sometimes if I'm not being aware and conscious. That's why I worked on activating my flow state on command. Being in the flow is powerful. This is because you are one with existence, in tune with the moment. During the tournament, I took the approach of emptying my mind, thinking of waves and being hollow on the inside, moving the subtle energies throughout my body, being formless and shapeless like Bruce Lee once said. I had no desire to win or lose, no thoughts, just watching and observing. Once they called me up to my matches, I let go and my body moved for me. When the matches started, it was almost like an out-of-body experience in the sense that I wasn't there. I could hear my opponents breathing hard while my breath was calm, like I was just taking a walk. I ended up going undefeated. After going undefeated the whole day, taking gold in my division, winning my first match in the next division and qualifying for the finals, I had one match left. It was against a guy who had been dominating the local competition scene. He was short but built like a tank, and he specialized in my technique. Then desire kicked in. I wanted to beat him. My mindset changed. I started thinking about how I could win this match and get 2 gold medals in one day. I started wanting and needing it. And this is when the flow state was disrupted. I felt it. I was no longer in alignment. My ego came back and I ended up losing the match. And this is when I had the epiphany that the more you desire something, the more work it'll take to get it. This is forcing. You have to work a lot harder to get what you want this way. But when you no longer desire something and just choose to be present and let go, it'll come to you a lot easier. I went undefeated when I was desireless. My only loss came from my need to win. This is because when you're needing something to happen, it means you're lacking it. When you no longer need it, you're coming from a place of already having it. So we all know this place of having no access to flow. Everyone hits a slump. Slump is a really interesting word. I looked it up. It means to fall or sink into a muddy place. And all athletes go into a slump, and all creative people go into a slump. Writer's block is kind of a classic example of slumping. Samuel Taylor Coleridge, his best work was in his 20s, and he basically spent the rest of his life bemoaning the loss of his gift. Truman Capote, I found out with a little research, spent the last 10 years of his life pretending to write a novel that was never there. Can you imagine? The flow state he got into to produce the pieces that he did, that had so much impact, and spending 10 years pretending to write a novel that was never there. Whoa, suffering. And Stephen King, who you don't think of him as having writer's block the way this guy cranks out words, but he wrote this in his book on writing. He said, there may be a stretch of weeks or months when it doesn't come at all. This is called writer's block. Some writers in the throes of writer's block think their muses have died, but I don't think that happens often. I think what happens is that the writers themselves sow the edges of their clearing with poison bait to keep their muses away, often without knowing they are doing it. That implies that there's some kind of self-sabotage that keeps us from accessing that flow state. I'm sure you know that feeling. When you can't get any creativity flowing, you've got ideas, but you can't execute. You're feeling utterly cut off from any sense of spontaneity. And how much of that is a sense of self-sabotage? Because while the flow state is exquisite, we can only access the flow state when we set I and mine aside. These magical, mystical moments when there's no I or mine present, that's both exhilarating and it can also feel a little bit disorienting. It can also feel a little scary. So if you think of the flow state as this intrinsic state, where the mind is not disturbed, there's no sense of I and mine, it becomes very, very clear that you can't manufacture it. You can't make it happen. All you can do is cultivate the most optimal environment possible. And this is where mindfulness comes in. This is where we come back to I won't say the basics, but there's something elemental in mindfulness. Moment to moment attention on purpose, concentration, arriving again and again and again. Because what happens is, if you, as I like to say, if you want to get concentrated and you engage in the concentration practice, you become more and more intimately aware of how you're not concentrated. You can begin to identify the patterns of resistance. You can begin to see the different ways that you get distracted. You can begin to see into the nature of the scattered mind. And you get more information. You become wiser in your capacity to cultivate concentration. If you decide you want to cultivate a greater sense of compassion and kindness and joy, and you bring your attention to the heart practices, inevitably, what you're going to begin to notice is how your heart is closed. All the wounding around your heart that has you shut down. All the ways that you judge, all the ways that you hold life at bay, all the ways you close down. That's part of the fruit, if you will, of your practice. And as a result is you get more familiar with the mechanism of a closed heart. And you might get some insights and see some possibilities as to how you can open your heart again to life. In that same way, when you bring your attention to what it means to be in the flow state, what it means to be in that sense of no I, no mine, the unfolding moment happening all by itself, what you'll begin to notice is everything that's between you and feeling ease. Everything between you and feeling trust. Everything between you and a quality of allowing and letting be. And so we come back to practice. Again and again and again, we come back to the here and now, which is the beauty of this practice of mindfulness. You relax, you soften. You can relax and soften through willful attention. You bring your attention to an object that's in the present moment. Again and again, you bring your attention back. You re-arrive. You can widen your attention. Notice what's changing. Notice the flow. And of course, what you notice is you notice what's happening, but then if you pay attention, you notice your relationship to what's happening. And you'll notice preferential awareness. You'll notice the stuff you like, the stuff you don't like, the stuff you're grasping for, the stuff you try and shut down. All of that is part of the fruit of the practice, is seeing what's between you and that flow state. It's challenging. It's hard, but there's incredible fruit in this practice. And just as my friend David was saying of how the flow state is always there. It's like if you've ever taken a plane and it's raining and intense storms and clouds, and you take off and you get right above the clouds, sunshine. So noticing what's between you and that flow state becomes super helpful. And here we have the classic teachings of recognizing the five mind states that make it impossible to access the present moment, that make it impossible to access the flow state. Anywhere there is anger, judgment, ill will, comparing mind, hatred. Anywhere there's wanting, desire, fantasy, planning. Anywhere there's worry, anxiety, restlessness. Anywhere there's density, anywhere there's sleepiness, fogginess, depression. Anywhere where there is a sense of doubt or getting hamstrung or paralyzed by the ruthless critic. The more you engage into an honest, authentic exploration of your relationship to presence, your relationship to the flow state, the more all of this gets amplified. It's like the neon lights occur. Whenever there's a self that's doing something, Whenever there's a sense of I and mine trying to make it happen, it's no go on flow. It's the bad news and the good news. The bad news, there are all these impediments to accessing presence. The good news is when you recognize them, they lose their power. And you can begin to open doorways that are going to take you into these incredible states of possibility. Noticing what's between you and flow can really help you to address this. And the beautiful thing is, just as in meditation practice, there are guidelines, there are techniques, there are best practices that can help you to arrive and cultivate presence. There are these same observations that you can apply in accessing more flow in your life. And I hate to tell you this, but we're not going to have enough time in this talk to talk about all the nuances of accessing the flow state. So we're going to pick this up down the road. But one way to think of it is that anytime you allow yourself to get concentrated in the present moment, and anytime you can begin to allow yourself to relax and be aware of what's changing and how you're relating to it, these are some of the elemental aspects of tapping into the flow state. Just a few things before we close. What's so interesting is how when you're in a flow state, when there's no sense of I or mine, when there's this sense of like getting deeply, deeply immersed into what's happening, all kinds of stuff is happening in your brain. The journalist Stephen Kotler talks about what he calls the Fantastic Five. He says that neuroepinephrine and dopamine tighten focus. They help you shut off the persistent distractions of a multitasked life. Endorphins block pain and let you burn the candle at both ends without burning out altogether. Anandamide prompts lateral connections and generates gestalt insights far more than most brainstorming sessions. And serotonin, the feel-good chemical at the heart of Prozac revolution, bonds teams together more powerfully than the best intentioned offsite. So let's close with a meditation here. If you like, you can close your eyes. And take a moment just to allow yourself to kind of sense this sort of inherent background of spaciousness and allowing. Can you sense the flow or the stream that's happening right now? There's a flow of sensations, sounds, feeling tone. There's a flow of thoughts. There's a flow of emotions, a flow of states. Can you imagine it all happening by itself? And take a few moments now to begin to sense what could soften or relax. You may have some particular areas that sort of like kick off the relaxation response. For me, it's the forehead smooth, letting your tongue relax and fill your lower jaw, softening palms, soles of the feet. Relaxed and alert. You might bring your attention now to a focal point and take a few moments to dial in your concentration. If it's breath, how intimately can you feel the breath on the inside? And can you blend deep relaxation with concentration and just feel the effect, if just for a few moments? Sense this observer. And sense if you can now widen your awareness, aware of everything that's changing. And just over these next few minutes, you might explore the following. Can you drop all technique now? Let the anchor fall away. And can you imagine no I, no mind? Awake to what's changing. And allowing everything to be exactly as it is. Can you imagine both this sense of a high level of concentration, you're aware of what's here, but also a quality of effortlessness? You might deepen your breath. If you like, you can let your body move and shift. If you like, you can open your eyes. Thank you so much for your time and attention. I get excited about these practices for what they can do for all of us to cultivate a greater sense of here and now, to create a greater sense of not just flow, to be aware of what's changing, but the pointers toward this possibility of what happens when I and mind falls away. What it's like to be present in your life without worry, without anxiety. Those states are so interesting. They're so enjoyable and so wholesome. So you might explore from time to time whatever you're immersed in, whether it's preparing a meal or putting dishes away or just out for a walk. How intimately can you be awake to exactly what's happening at the same time as it's happening? To usher in a sense of effortless awareness. And to allow yourself perhaps just glimpses of what it's like to simply allow things to be, allow things to flow. Next time we'll talk more about some of the characteristics of the flow state and some of the ways that you can more and more readily create the conditions that can help you access this amazing state of presence. Thank you so much, and many, many blessings in your practice.